Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you very much for coming. It's truly an honor for me whenever I introduce our speakers at MSR, but especially today with Sebastian Thrun. Professor Sebastian Thrun is head of the Stanford AI Laboratory, world famous, and now world famous for another reason that you might have heard of today. Sebastian, please entertain us with your robots.
Thank you. I always love the applause in advance because then I know nothing can go wrong anymore. I got my applause. So I'm here to tell you a wonderful story that happened in my life, that transformed my life, and I'm still married, which is good. And also tell you some of the technology that hasn't been widely publicized behind this. But let me test you guys first. Who here has heard about DARPA Grand Challenge before? Ah, good. Everybody. Great. Okay, let's do a more contentious question. Who here thinks that cars should drive themselves? Who is against it? Okay, good. I come back to those 4 arms. And who here thinks Microsoft should be in the business of doing that? I left open what that meant. Okay, so this is about the DARPA Grand Challenge, which all of you have heard about, a unique robotic race. And just to set the stage, this is a slide you shouldn't read, but the military has been interested in self-driving cars for about 3 decades and put about $500 million of funding into it, mostly corporate funding, through various programs. And after doing this, and after General Dynamics eating up hundreds of millions of dollars these days, they decide they're not quite where they want to be. The cars still break down all the time. They go 10 miles per hour period. So let's change the funding model. Let's double the speed. Let's make car much more reliable and ditch the idea of funding. And instead come up with a prize. So DARPA created in 2003 this thing called Grand Challenge, where you wouldn't get any funding. You still had to do all the work. And you could win $2 million, originally 1 and then 2. So it's a really great business proposition. Now it turns out in 2004, you might remember the race was first run. Originally it was intended to go from Los Angeles to Vegas, but then they found there were too many kids playing in Los Angeles. So they started in Barstow. Barstow is a lovely place. I don't know if you've guys been there. Kill Bill 2 plays in Barstow when the snake kind of hits his face, if you've seen Kill Bill. And it goes to Prim. Prim is equally frustrating. It's just a big casino there of people who can't buy the fuel to go to Vegas. They're playing Prim. And the idea was to have a complete robotic race. So take a car, take the person out of the car, replace them by a computer, maybe running Windows, and then push a button in the beginning and wait for up to 10 hours. And along the 150 miles, the car has to make all the decisions. But you do endow it with a course map, basically a set of GPS breadcrumbs, and you also give it some speed limits along the way so it doesn't escape its chase vehicle that's there for protection. Now, the 2004 race was often described as a disaster in the media. It had a lot of valuable lessons, in my opinion. And much better technology than people realize. But this is a small college in Pittsburgh where I used to work, and I forgot the name. Carnegie, Cranberry Lemon, something. In 2004, the people had relatively little time to build up to it, and they spent a lot of time on hardware, surprisingly enough. This, I believe, is Caltech. And about 17 vehicles raced. The first 3 or 4 had a velocity where it could actually arrive in 10 hours time for 142 miles, and then they become slower and slower. This is team that, and some had some very serious control problems. They had obviously never been tested before. This one actually flipped over just after this video stops. This was the heaviest of all machines, a 15-ton defense contractor, and this one actually made about a mile or so. I finished this year. And is anybody here from UC Berkeley? Okay, good. Okay, so Cal also had an entry. Cal is our big competitor in the Bay Area. They always beat Stanford in football. So here's Cal's entry. Okay. Actually, I talked to Anthony Lewandowski afterwards, and he told me this year they would double their performance. Which is good, you know. Actually, I have a lot of admiration for these guys. It's really hard to make a motorcycle go. Right? So at mile 7.3 in the mountains, less than 5% into the race ended, and here's some of the video footage taken from a helicopter. Carnegie Mellon's vehicle missed the road. The road is relatively large, as you can see. The road is completely flat like a pancake, but there's a cliff line next to it. They basically drove off it, and they got high-centered, and the tires spun freely and burned up on the tires and so on, and that was the end race. Okay, so the journalist said, okay, there's a big disaster. Cars should drive 142 miles, can only go 5%, not good enough. Now, in 2004, we had 106 teams competing for no money, as it turned out. So in 2005, we had 195 teams competing, but roughly double, twice as many. Also, 194 of those made no money. Stanford was a first-time entrant at the time. I decided after I saw the first race, it might be fun to play and see how far we get. So what I want to tell you a little bit is kind of the history of the Stanford team and the type of technical innovations that we came across in doing this. There's nothing terribly deep here, but a lot of entertaining stuff. So first thing is we had no money. So I visited Tandy and said we need money from Microsoft. And Tandy asked the obvious question, what operating system are you running? That was my end to get Microsoft money. And then what do you do with a college professor if you have no money, right? So you teach a class. So we taught CS294. DARPA Grand Challenge, and you don't give the students money, you give them course credit. So here's my class of 20 students that in the end all got course credit in Barstow, running the first version of our software that we built up in about 2 months total. They discovered some very basic things, like some very basic control laws. For example, here's one that we actually used in the race. If you want to follow a given trajectory like this one over here, make sure your front tires are parallel to this trajectory. But if you suffer some lateral cross-track error, then steer even more. That rule can get you at low speed basically back to the course, up to like 30 miles per hour or so. And then we started, so here's a little animation or a little video of doing this about a month into the development work. You can see the automated car. It has a little chain around the steering column. You can drive it. It's oscillated a tiny little bit. There's some emergency stop button that play an important role in the progress of our next next months. And this is a little test track that's completely shielded off. So we're following basically these GPS breadcrumbs. And it's fairly stable. It's going 25 miles per hour stably. And then we started playing with collision detection. So the reason why the red team drove off is there was a good road and bad road, and they just didn't see that there was bad terrain, and they just drove off the road. So we need something to perceive the environment. And in robotics, the classical system is a laser system. Laser system works as follows. It sends a little beam on a rotating mirror. Okay, the beam goes out, a light beam. It's an infrared laser beam. You can't see it. Gets reflected at obstacles like this trash bin, and then it just measures the time for the beam to come back. It turns out you can do this with about centimeter accuracy. Turns out light is not particularly fast. So that wasn't a joke. So you can actually then go and build these three-dimensional maps of the environment, which I'll show you later on. So we started playing with this, and just show you some of the very, very early behavior. This is a parking garage at Stanford. This is usually full of cars, but when people found out what we were doing, they actually parked somewhere else. And we put these paper boxes there, reminiscent of like real desert obstacles. And we started driving around those, and it was kind of okay. But then we went into the desert on December 1st, it was the last day in class, like the final exam, so to speak. And I was in the car, and my postdoc was in the car. It's you can see the car makes you seasick. The person can barely hold the camera still. It wasn't very elegant. It's a very different kind of grading if the code that your students produce actually control the life of the person who grades them. But we did pass by mile 7.3. This is exactly where the red team failed. And we, of course, put this on the web to show everybody else. We actually made 8.5 miles on this day. So we didn't make it much further. Then we became more serious. So we decided to get a supporter base or funding base. So we talked to a couple of companies that provide all kinds of things. Volkswagen, the vehicle. There's a venture capital firm. The cool thing about living in the Bay Area is they can get venture capital firms to invest in you, even though they give you as a gift. There's no return of investment. A startup, a major drink manufacturer. We didn't get any defense contractors like Carnegie Mellon did. We just got these softies. Intel was involved and so on. And we came up with a This is frightening. This is actually our system architecture diagram of the robotics software. Every module is in there, and about 10 months before the race, we drafted this, and it's basically survived all the way to the actual race. But we set up the global software infrastructure. And since most of you do some sort of programming, you're probably more familiar with it than I am. Things we did is, for example, you had to react to obstacles. You had to do some planning. So here's some rollover trajectories. You can see how the vehicle would consider staying parallel to the core trajectory, but be able to change its level offset gradually over time, and thereby get some smooth deviation from it. It's the idea of avoiding berms and obstacles. Put into a system, you drive like this. I haven't just told you what this red stuff really is, but I'll tell you this in a second when I talk about problems. And then in April, we had to pass our first hurdle. We had to prove to DARPA that among the 195 teams, we're actually worthy of being considered a semi-finalist, of which there was supposed to be 40, but DARPA is not good in counting, so they made 43 of those. And the way it worked is you would submit a video like this and show what your vehicle can do. This is manual driving. And then some judges would come and judge you. Now, we weren't the only ones. Carnegie Mellon was gearing up with their Hummer, and they had some very impressive videos of the vehicle doing some motion. They actually built 2 cars. They figured they would double their chances in the race by having 2 cars, which is a very, very good logic. It just didn't occur to us at Stanford. And then there was also kind of other players. Like this is one of my favorites. This is so it's interesting to see what kind of people this kind of race attracts. Like there's the world-class universities that have a name to lose, right? And then there's corporate entities that keep everything top secret, of course, so you don't get any videos. And then there's car nuts. There's people who have like a fixed idea to build a tracked vehicle. Their claim to fame is that this vehicle is faster in acceleration than any other vehicle that's on the planet. But they don't do software, but they have a nice towing truck and so on, and they're really tough guys. And to the end, we had teams like these. In fact, there was one high school team. Here's my other favorite one. I'm going to take the microphone down. This was actually the most watched. Oops, I lost it. Ouch. Okay, let me skip this. Okay, so come site visit. This is the first time our vehicle goes by itself, autonomously without a driver inside. And what we had to do is basically come up with a zigzag curve, an S curve, and the vehicle had to follow it by itself. And then the judges from DARPA would place this evil obstacle called a trash bin in the vehicle's path, and the vehicle had to sense the trash bin and elegantly drive around it. Now, we didn't really get good B scoring. The elegance wasn't very high, but the effectiveness was there. And for us, it was good enough because we don't care about smooth driving. But so if you look from the sky, the way it looked like this. Again, this is using lasers. I'll tell you more about lasers in a sec. You see these red dots over here. These are the traffic cones that delimit the course. This is noise, or maybe some 3D stuff. And then there's this trash bin coming up in a sec right over here. And you can see the somewhat unelegant steering response that we could do. But that response was good enough to place us in the list of semi-finalists. So we achieved our goal of moving on. It was May, about 4 months before the race. And then a long phase began where basically, my wife and I went different paths. I spent all the time in the desert, and she didn't. We would run the old course. Here's some pictures from last year's course, run autonomously, and try to increase just one important metric, which was the mean distance between failures. So at the time, when we started out, we could do about a mile between failures, and here we came to the point where we could do 20 miles between failures. And we still had occasional failures where the vehicle would just jump off the road and kill itself. And we had, of course, our emergency stop button, including some extreme situations like this was rain in the desert, and this is an autonomously driving car. People inside can't see anything except for the person on the back seat looking at the laptop, seeing all these obstacles. And he actually says, car's still okay, car's still okay, we keep driving, we don't see anything. So let's talk about some of the technology involved that we developed. And any of these stories goes with a long period of pain that I'm not going to inflict on you, but believe me, the many, many months leading up to the problem. So this is a typical one. We tried to drive the 2004 course. Things like these would happen every 20 miles. So here's a wonderful, nice red map. And all of a sudden, these red bars pop up that have no physical meaning in the world, but they're basically misinterpretation of the sensor data. and the vehicle basically would do that. Now, if on the right side there was a cliff, then we would all be dead, and I couldn't report this talk anymore. So these are the moments where we had to manually take over, and we would count as a catastrophic failure of the system. So what happened? Well, let me go a step back and tell you something about the way we actually interpret sensor data, okay? So the very first thing when you build a car is you have to understand where the car is. And the way this is done, has been done for 30, 40 years, is an integration of, it's called vehicle guidance, of inertial measurement, and more recently GPS antennas to give you, the GPS give you a course referencing where you are, and the accelerometers and the rate gyros give you an idea of how fast you're moving and how fast you're accelerating and so on. From that you typically get a fairly smooth trajectory where the car is. Okay, that's typically done in cruise missiles, it's done in tornadoes and all kinds of different vehicles. When you do this, you can take your scanning laser that scans the ground, as I showed you before, and build a 3D point cloud. So this is a point cloud. There's 4 different colors involved from 4 different lasers. So one is arbitrarily yellow, one is arbitrarily green, red, and blue. And you can see some of them are angled very steeply down, like the blue one. So they have a relatively short range, and some of them are actually angled further out, like the yellow one and the red one. And you get these point clouds. So what you have to do to understand where to drive is interpret these point clouds and come up with a measure of what's drivable and what isn't. It's about that simple. Just in simplification, what this means is here's your car scanning. A single scan is insufficient to capture the entire terrain. Your car becomes essentially the same as a linear scanner. So it moves forward and scans again and so on, and you put these together into a database of points where you basically make assessment, is there something vertical or not. So if you have, for example, a vertical obstacle like this, and you move forward, your scanner will scan this obstacle vertically. If you compare the top and bottom point, you know there's an obstacle or not. Okay? That's the essential logic. It's incredibly primitive. Okay? I'm slightly embarrassed. You can pitch. Sometimes you pitch. When you pitch, what happens is your scan line moves in the opposite direction from your driving line because you're pitching down and forward. And the effect that has is that you get occasionally moments where the car just pitches. This is taken from real data. And scans the same terrain twice. So that was just one. Another one. They're hard to see. You see these little things going back and forth, like this one. This is the effect of pitching. So the car basically pitches down and scans twice. Now, if your pitch sensor is really accurate, suppose you have $200,000 in the bank and are willing to invest it into a top-notch IMU, inertial measurement unit, then that works fine. But if you only have $8,000 like us and are cash deprived, then you get these moments where your pitch is wrong and your data interpretation becomes wrong. So if you compare this point over here to this point over there, right over there, then this is clearly more than any threshold that's reasonable to drive. Okay, that problem actually I had 4 of my best grad students working on this for about 8 or 9 months. We couldn't solve. We had these occasional moments where our pitch estimate was just wrong in the IMU, and we just couldn't get this straight. So we then went into what's described in my book, which I have as a gift from Microsoft. You should all buy. It just came out last year. Probabilistic Robotics, and did some probabilistic modeling of the actual sensor sources. And the way it works is, it turns out that your pitch estimate is subject to very slow drift in these cars. So as you try to estimate where you're pointing, over time you lose more and more relative accuracy of your pointing angle. That can be modeled with the Markov chain, as shown here, where the Markov chain gets as input GPS data and sensor data, and from the state estimate where the vehicle is over time, you can estimate where exactly this 3D point is that you're currently analyzing. And then if you start comparing 2 points recorded at different points in time, there's an error that crept in through this Markov process that increases as a function of time passed by, increases also as a function of other factors like how far the reading was out, because the Z value is sensitive to the total range of the measurement. Further out you measure, the more sensitive it is. So this is a very simple drawing, a relatively complex Markov model with lots and lots of parameters. And all it does, it takes the deterministic test as to whether 2 points are an obstacle and turns it into a stochastic test. Now you can say, what's the probability of an obstacle under your Markov model? Okay. Now that Markov model captures a little bit of the error in the system, which is important to capture. Then we had to find a way to fill the parameters of this Markov model. And I'm skipping over lots of math here, but the easiest way, I mean, one thing you could do is you could go and ask the manufacturers, can you tell me what the error is? But the manufacturers all lie. So if you ask a GPS manufacturer and tells you 20 centimeter accuracy, he probably means 2 meters and got the units wrong. Further, they don't tell you the temporal development of errors over time, which is what you really care about. So it allows you to fill out certain arcs, like these ones over here, but not those arcs over there. They're all completely ignorant about those. So you can now go and fuzz with them and maybe adjust them by hand and see when you like the map the best. But even that is hard because you have to look at your data and make an assessment, where actually the obstacles are. You could send out halls of undergrads to label your data. This was a bush, this wasn't. But the parents of Stanford undergrads don't like it when you make them do this. So we found a way to tune these automatically, which was incredibly simple. Okay, it was really super simple, which basically says, okay, a human driver can give us labeled data almost for free. And the way he does it, when a person drives along a road, the corridor on which the person drives is usually drivable. So we know that if the parameters are set correctly, our statistical test should never ever return obstacle for the white band under the car. And then we made this kind of false assumption, which still worked nice, to call the stripes on the side non-drivable. They are mostly drivable, but then you set up a discriminative learning technique that just tries to maximize the margin between the drivable and non-drivable stuff. And out comes a set of parameters that basically eliminates all false positives. So on the left you see the original version, on the right the new version. Statistically, in some of the data, we reduced false positives from 12.6% to 0.02%. So with a little bit of learning and a little bit of Markov modeling, not even mathematically well-founded, we're able in a couple of days to basically eliminate all errors in our map, which was fairly cool for us. It was a big achievement. I'm still happy today about that, especially given the fact that we won $2 million. Let's see. With the laser, there's this one problem. It doesn't see very far. It sees about 20 meters out. It doesn't see further. The reason is you have to carry your own energy source and so on. These lasers are very cheap. So we wanted to look further. So we had to come with an idea to look further. We wanted to look further because we wanted to drive faster. Okay? The reason we want to drive faster is we did analysis of speed limits for 2004. It turns out the course itself has zoned into different speed limits. The speed limits are mostly there to protect turtles, for example. Turns out if you drive slowly over them, they're apparently safer than if you drive fast. At least we've been told. But also to make sure that the chase vehicle behind you is safe. If you stir up too much dust, they can't see anymore, and you drive away from them, and they can't stop you when something gets dangerous. So this is the statistic of speed limits in the 204 race. And we figured if you only drive 25 miles per hour, we're kind of too slow. We have to go 35 miles per hour. Then we have to have the bulk of the speed limits under the hood. So what's the obvious thing to do? I guess Microsoft Research is a leader in computer vision. So I'm preaching to the choir. We just need to write a little module that said, okay, take a camera image and tell me where the road is. Now, it looks like if computer vision has made progress over the last 30 years, then finding a road must be the obvious thing that we long solved. At least so we thought. But it turns out there's no good description of a road. We started out saying maybe the brownish thing is the road. Until the paved roads were immediately misclassified, right? Then we said, okay, maybe the road is a smooth surface, okay? The smoothest thing in the image. The smoother it is, the more road-like it is. That turns the entire sky into a road. It's not a good idea either. So what we decided to do is a little trick, and Intel helped us come up with that, Gary Bretsky and his team, which is we didn't need to solve the full road finding problem. We didn't need to describe the road. We just need to solve the incremental road finding problem. In other words, we could use our laser, identify a region in front of the vehicle that we know to be flat from the laser, project this into the camera image, as done here in this blue trapezoid, and then ask, can we see similar stuff further out? In other words, you do a Photoshop flood fill, if you so like, where your flood begins at the bottom level, and it goes out into the higher part of the image. So you can see as the vehicle goes into green stuff, the grass, for example, the moment it transitions, it flood fills kind of the rest of the green stuff and still see some of the obstacles. So it's more of an adaptive version of vision where you get your own training examples as you run 10 times a second, and you train, in this case, a mixture of Gaussians to adapt to it. There's some downsides. So when you go in the tunnel, you can see it can only detect kind of when the laser's inside, and it makes some mistakes, like entire walls become drivable. But never mind. Still, you can see that the system relatively effectively adapts. In fact, here's our little trapezoid extracted from the laser data. You can imagine how that works. And here's the process in stages. You see the trapezoid being projected into the image over here. And then you can see the flood fill over here in the desert coloring the terrain. And when you do this, like over here, you can now go and rectify that prediction into a 2D overhead view, which is what you use for driving. This is now pointing down. It's a little bit confusing what is going down. And the interesting thing to see here is the laser, this is dark red stuff, reaches about 20 meters. Each circle is 10 meters, with the yellow circles. And the vision goes up 60 to 80 meters. So all of a sudden we are able to see 60 to 80 meters out. So you can go really fast. It's not perfect. So sometimes vision says you can't drive because maybe the pavement changes. But all you do then is just slow down. You wouldn't steer. And we just use it as an early warning system for obstacles. And then the laser could catch it. So this is data from the race. Just to show you how this works. When I saw the post-race data, I actually was quite amazed by the capability to find a road in this video. And this is actually what ran 10 times a second. Again, it's not perfect. Like shadows cause problems and so on. And the vehicle in the end slowed down more often than it should have. But apparently it was still just good enough to win the race. So we had a way to do long-range vision. Final thing I want to tell you is the problem with speed. People often think about driving as steering, but not as accelerating and decelerating. And when we went really fast, like 40 miles per hour, it became really frightening to be in the car, because if it goes 40 miles per hour through a narrow mountain pass, you realize you can't possibly stop it before it crashes down a cliff if it makes a mistake. So we looked into speed analysis. And again, just to cut a long story short, what we ended up doing is say, let's use a human trainer to train how fast the robot should go. It's the best way for us to set a speed. And we abstracted the human driver into a very simple control rule, which is when the person goes into rough terrain, with rough road or steep road or narrow road, he's slowing down because he gets frightened. And if the terrain turns nice again, he's going to gradually increase his speed at a certain rate. It's almost like you make a mistake, you drive too fast, you get into rough terrain too fast, you slow down, and you're frightened for a while, and then there's this recovery rate, this linear recovery rate. By having a person drive these 2 miles over here, you could acquire or monitor the speed, shown in blue, and then make a function approximator fit the controller to give you the same behavior. And you can see situations where the controller slows down rapidly and then kind of slowly gets up again to speed, then slows down rapidly. And these rapid slowdowns all correspond to either a shock in the ground or some narrow pitching of the road and so on. It turns out this is remarkable because we spent no time on setting the speeds. We let Stanley choose all the speeds. Our favorite team from Pittsburgh had a complete different approach. This is a 20-minute long video on the web where one of the team members of Carnegie Mellon explains their approach. And their approach was essentially have a team of 24 people sit there and meticulously label every inch of desert terrain and say how fast the robot should go. And to aid that process, they actually had a vehicle there for months on end recording all roads in the Mojave Desert to make sure that they have enough data to make this assessment. So he's explaining in length, I sped this up a little bit, how to set the speeds. And we just basically we put the data in and said, well, Stanley's going to figure out himself. And the journalist asked how long it's going to take. And we don't know. It's going to make its own decisions. Whereas Carnegie Mellon could say exactly this duration. So come race time, we had a car that could drive fairly competently, avoid obstacles, set its own speeds. And before the race, we had a long run of 200 miles on one day, just 2 or 3 weeks after Carnegie Mellon did this and broke the news in the Associated Press. And we had average speeds of about 22 miles, which sounds slow, but is fast either in the desert or in Seattle too, actually, just having been stuck in traffic all morning. And we actually managed to drive 418 flawless miles, which is quite a distance for us. So we were quite content that we had a good chance. And of course, we dressed up the vehicle like a clown, so we had all kinds of sponsors. The funny thing here was we had like Red Bull and Volkswagen, and the Hammer guys had Boeing and SAIC, the big defense contractors. So there was an article afterwards commenting on that. Carnegie Mellon also had training videos. This is one of their videos, and they did impressive work, honestly. And I mean, if you want to remember the race correctly, don't remember that Stanford won. There were 5 winners, and Carnegie was as good as Stanford, all practical means, even though we got the cash. There's my favorite team from Berkeley also had some training videos posted. It's one of theirs. They were really prepared for underwater driving. And I think I have a second one. This is one that they posted as well. Not everybody posted their most spectacular videos, but they did. That's 36 miles per hour, apparently. They weren't the only ones flipping over, so Carnegie Mellon also got into the habit of flipping over. Let's see. Oh, yeah. That's Carnegie Mellon about a week before the race, and I think that's what cost them the $2 million, what happened here. So come, it's actually a software bug. They actually saw the berm over here on the side, but couldn't avoid it. So they just ran into it. And it turns out even with 20 miles per hour, you flip your Hummer if you do this. So come race day, it was called the National Qualification Event. And this is in September last year in Fontana, there's a speedway, where DARPA kind of built up this fake obstacle course that I'll show you in a second. 43 teams were admitted to this last stage of the race, and the idea was to select them down to 20 teams that would be permitted to the race itself. This is the ring itself, and all this one says is it wasn't really desert terrain, but they kind of put a couple of obstacles in there that had the same structure or the same resemblance as the ones you would actually see in the desert. And they would test vehicles if they'd be able to finish this course. And about half of the 43 were able to finish at least once. So here's our favorite robot from the Bay Area doing the thing. The very first thing it encounters is a big narrow gate kind of situation. That turned to be fatal for things like motorcycles and so on. But Stanley just drove straight through it. And there was an abandoned car and so on. And then later on it went into a fast motion segment where you could go 40 miles per hour. There was a big tunnel. Yeah, this is the fast motion segment. It's really funny to see the difference of different types of teams, different approaches and different capabilities. So for the well-prepared teams, this was essentially a piece of cake. They would run their robot. They might run over one hay bale, but that was pretty much it. And in other vehicles, they would still have the GPS via points from their home state, and they would try to go back home as opposed to follow this race. This is the tunnel. This is hard. It's a relatively narrow tunnel. It emulates an underpass on the I-15, which was part of the race. It's hard because you lose GPS coverage, so you lose your guidance. And the moment you emerge from the tunnel, your internal estimate where you might think you are will deviate from the GPS, and that leads to all kinds of drunk squirrel kind of behavior for robots coming out of the tunnel. This was a simulated power pole. Turns out the race went through a major power line that supplies all of Los Angeles with power. So there was an opportunity to knock out Los Angeles during the race. This is DARPA's biggest concern. Now here's some of the other teams. That's taken from an hour-long special that Nova aired in March. This is the Silicon Valley team, Team Dan. They have a fantastic laser, but didn't quite make it to this specific run. The motorcycle again, Anthony Lewandowski, whom I greatly admire, built another motorcycle. He got controls worked out, but not perception. So he hit a lot of stuff. But he did the most amazing thing. This is one of the most amazing video that I have. He actually was able to upright itself and keep going and raise from the dead. Some of them actually were quite dangerous. This is Team Jefferson. They built this kind of retrofit kind of, I don't know, a hamburger kind of cell station. And they had a software bug that made them accelerate in the tunnel, and no one saw it. It came out with 60 miles per hour. And one person had to actually be picked up by an ambulance afterwards. This is Carnegie Mellon. One of the very few instances where they avoided obstacles. I would have called it crash, and Red Whittaker just said, a Hummer can take that, no problem. So he later on they fixed the calibration problem, and the robot ran just fine. And then there were all kinds of other cars, like all kinds of robots that even the first obstacle wouldn't even see it. And it kind of reminds us how hard it actually is to make a car drive itself. It's not at all trivial to do this. So all kinds of collisions that you can see here, like this one. Now there's 2 unmanned vehicles moving. Right. This got stuck in the tunnel. The backup mode apparently. A lot of rearrangement of hay bales. This was an interesting one. You could barely see this. It had a robot with like 20 lasers on top, and it was a university, and every student was programming one laser, and they had a stack of 20 laptops in the trunk. Here's Terramax. That's how the military contractors deal with tank traps and so on. Race itself, 23 finalists, so we made it to the finals, which was great. So did Carnegie Mellon and Carnegie Mellon. And race started at 4 o'clock in the morning, where we got the secret data file of the coordinates. We had 2 hours to process it. Carnegie Mellon then emerged in their meticulous labeling, and we just plugged it into the robot, and that was it, and talked for the next 1 hour, 55 minutes to journalists. And then we were seated second, right? It was a time race. We were seated second after Highlander, which was faster in the race than we were in the prelims. But at some point we passed them. So the race itself, I have this nice video here that comes out of PBS. If you have a chance, type in the Great Robot Race into Microsoft search, sorry. And up comes the PBS movie that's about an hour long. It's really, really well done. So here's Carnegie Mellon waiting to start, Stanley in the morning, and Carnegie Mellon is going off first. A really beautiful straight line approach, going off in the desert, 131 miles. We have a little glitch in the beginning, you saw that. People thought the race was over after 0 miles for Stanford, but we kind of recovered. We had no GPS in the beginning of the race, which is sad. That part was really interesting. So you spend, maybe it's shipping software to a customer is similar, although most of you probably don't ship software to customers. If you spend like a whole year in a car, right, and then see it go off by itself into the desert without a person in sight, you just see it disappear. I always compare it to sending kids to college. That's my feeling, you know. You've worked on them and you're really perfectioning them, you know, and then they have to make their own decision from one day to the next, and you hope they come back, right, without dents, you know, or not pregnant, whatever it is you worry about. Now, Carnegie had a little problem with their flipped-over Hummer. The engine started striking. They lost ignition twice, and it restarted automatically. And that gave Stanley an ability to close up with Carnegie Mellon. So here you see the various vehicles racing. What we saw was basically this display over here. This is vastly accelerated, and some of you might have seen it. This is the website for the course. It's very confusing. There's Carnegie Mellon, Stanley, Carnegie Mellon racing over here. But we couldn't see at all what was going on. So occasionally vehicles would choose to crash right next to the journalist, and they could tape it, but most of the time they would just crash somewhere in the desert and no one would actually see what's going on. And they crashed in all kinds of funny ways, like this one. Now, as I said, at mile 80 or so, Carnegie Mellon developed engine problems, and you see the Hummer limping as opposed to driving fast. And as a result, Stanley was able to close up its 5-minute gap down to 2 or 3 minutes. At which point we took formally the lead, which was completely unbelievable to us because Carnegie Mellon had consistently driven more aggressively and faster than Stanford. So you can see again the proximity of these two cars. So for maybe 20 or 30 miles, there was really a neck-and-neck kind of race between the two. And then Stanley kept going faster, and the organizer would pause it. The time wouldn't count against us. And eventually we end up in a big lake where the organizer said, you know, we're sick and tired of pausing Stanley. Let's pause Carnegie Mellon and let Stanley take the lead. This is the video footage from our car taking the lead over Carnegie Mellon's vehicle. It's actually correctly classified as a piece of obstacle and avoided by Stanley. And now it's taking the lead. The rest was just this nice, treacherous kind of mountain pass, which was the last real obstacle. And it's psychologically hard for people to drive it because of the cliff. For robots, it's a piece of cake because there's a berm, and the berm is just the same as anything else, as plans. So we knew that the robot would do it just fine. DARPA had stationed videographers in the live video feed, so you could see this in the tent, and you could see everybody, some people really excited, like the guys in blue t-shirts, and some people really disappointed, like the guys in red t-shirts. And then after that part, we all went outside and kind of waited for a robot, and it took about an hour from there for it to come back. And the first thing you see is a helicopter distance, you know, and then you realize, well, maybe the helicopter is trailing your robot, and then you see a dust cloud, and then dust cloud turns into a blue spot, and then all of a sudden you realize, wow, you've actually made it, and the robot came back. It was really a big moment for us. And I think a big moment for robotics too, because people had predicted that this is impossible. Again, the fact that 5 robots won is the key thing, not the Stanley one, but I think it's still a great achievement for the field. Just a few little impressions along the race. This is process data where we show that Carnegie Mellon's robot is correctly identified as an obstacle and avoided as such. This is the vision data. There's Carnegie Mellon's robot coming up at the horizon. On the right side you see the map. Okay, and in the map you're going to see little obstacle popping up as soon as Carnegie Mellon is in reach, and then the robot making the right decision to just avoid it. Hammers look pretty obvious in maps, like big shoeboxes. Here's the shadow of the car in the map, and then we drive around it. Carnegie Mellon also posted their video feed on the web. So they actually recorded as well. So this is how it looks from Carnegie Mellon's perspective. Please finish. DARPA just announced a new race, just in the way of information, called the Urban Challenge. It's actually going to be bigger than the previous one. And there's two essential differences. Now it's in the city. The differences are, the first one is there's actually going to be traffic, so we have to accommodate traffic, which didn't exist in the Grand Challenge. And the second one is, rather than telling the robot exactly what route to take, the robot has to find its own way. And it's going to encounter blockages of main roads and so on, just like you expect it to be in Baghdad, and so on. Why is this hard? We all know this is quite hard to find your own way and recognize what is moving traffic and so on. We're gearing up to this. We have a 360-degree ladybug camera on the roof now, and we're soon going to have a 360-degree laser that can do perception out to 80 meters and so on. And we're working right now on the software components, which are much more involved than they were last year. And I predict it's going to be a big race. It's going to be a race that's going to have more media coverage, or at least as much as last time around, because people see the progress. And there's a lot of excitement right now. November 3rd. I want to conclude, I think I'm out of time here, by just a few words as to what the real perspective is for me, why I work on this, and respond to the point people who are skeptical about self-driving cars. The military made it clear that the big picture for them is to put unmanned vehicles into the battlefield, which I personally couldn't care less about, to be honest. My motivation comes out of something that surrounds us every single day. So in the United States, we lose in the order of 43,000 people every year due to traffic accidents, the vast majority of which is lost because of human error. 1,500 people die because of a collision with a tree. 17,000 people because of drunk driving or speeding. 1,500 flip over in their Ford Explorer or whatever it is that makes them flip over. It's huge. It's the leading cause of death, aged 3 to 33. If we were to invent something that would kill 42,000 people, like almost as many as we lost in all of Vietnam War, I don't think it has a chance to be brought to market at this point. It's just that we've gotten used to it, the fact that we lose so many people. If you ignore that part, you can even lose it with commuting. I'm sure you in Seattle are very familiar with this. The average American worker spends more than an hour per day in traffic, stuck in traffic. And as much fun as driving can be, I argue being stuck in commute day in, day out is not a fun thing to do. If you could free up that time and make people more productive, you might actually have a substantial impact on their life. So this is my last slide. We are now pursuing not just the next Grand Challenge, but also a mission to drive from San Francisco to Los Angeles to really understand what it means to build a self-driving car that's 100% reliable. And we have new ideas how to fix some of the problems that made previous self-driving cars not reliable. I talked about saving lives and saving money. I talked about making people more productive. You can easily imagine making elderly people who otherwise can't drive, or kids, drive. In fact, my father is suffering Alzheimer, and I'm going to fly to Germany 10 days from now to essentially sell his car so he doesn't drive anymore. That means he's going to be dependent, and the moment he's dependent, he's going to deteriorate very quickly. There's a quality of life issue here. Blind people, elderly people, disabled people, and so on. Highway throughput. This is something that people often don't pay attention to. If you take a highway at peak capacity and ask yourself how much of that highway is occupied by cars and how much is still free. Peak capacity is you're driving about 50 miles per hour, and the lane endures about 2,000 vehicles per hour per lane. Okay, that's about what you can get into a lane today. If you look at how much is actually occupied, how much is free, it turns out only 8% is taken by cars, and 92% is still free real estate. Okay? So if you could increase this to, say, 16% and have 84% free real estate, you could double the capacity of highways. We have fundamental change to society in this country, in that we're building no new highways at this point. We have a birth rate increase of population of 3% per year. We have certainly an increase of the distance that people are willing to commute. We're steering into a disaster with regards to highway transportation. There's a lot of investment in public transit, but less than 1% of the United States people use public transit. So it's basically all highway based. Or this is my last point here. Change urban real estate. I mean, when I came up to I guess in this building the parking is underneath the building. In Stanford the parking lots are right next to the buildings. And the reason why they're there is because I hate to walk from my car to my office. Right? So if my car could park itself, it could drop me off and I say goodbye, and it could park somewhere else, you know, so I can regain this real estate as a parking lot and turn to office space. Or I could even pick up my wife, who could then use it, and we could share a car. I guess. All kinds of visions. I think if you look at this vision, Stanford alone will of course not make this into reality. It's a long road. But if you look at this vision, I think the impact of self-driving cars will be tremendous. And we can really compare it to large innovations like the internet in terms of how it will change people's lives. And I've been sitting in a self-driving cars for many, many hours. And I can attest to you, once you sit in the car for long enough, you really don't want to drive home manually after a party anymore. It feels so incredibly good to be driven, at least to me, occasionally, that it feels right. I think the car is a young instrument. It's about 100 years old. If you just think 50 years ahead, it's going to be obvious it's going to drive itself, and we will be better off, in my opinion. And if you disagree, then raise your voice. With that, I'd like to finish, and thank you for your attention and for your invitation. Sure, questions, yes.
I'm getting kind of tired of driving myself, so I was wondering how soon do you think, like realistically, what's the time frame?
This entirely depends on the question of whether Microsoft's going to fund us the next round or not. Just kidding. No, I'm kidding. So, I've been asked this question. I'm really kidding. I'm not even asking.
I think you know the condition.
No, it turns out that Google will fund us. That's a different problem. So I'm really joking. I think the technology needs maturing. I think we've reached good highway driving. We've reached good suburban driving. There's obstacles with regards to making these cars really reliable. Humans can drive about 1 million miles before a fatal accident. So every 1 million miles in exploitation you die. Cars are not anywhere near that. But with the infrastructure we have and GPS and so on, I think in the next 10 years with a good effort we could probably get there. Or get into the direction for certain domains, say, so it's highway driving, for example, which is the easiest type of driving. Now, the real problem is legislation, right? So, for example, there's no precedent for a car that drives itself without a person inside. In fact, it's highly illegal in Europe. There's a fundamental convention called Vienna Convention against that idea. So you can't do it. Now, I can't predict how this will work out legally, and I'm sure some people will make money and other people will lose money. The path it will take is likely through what's called driver assist systems. Driver assist systems are like your ABS system that refuses your command to brake and lets the brake go because you're more effective. There's something called adaptive cruise control where you keep fixed distance to the person ahead of you, so you have to active speed control. There's something called lane departure warning system that warns you when you're about to veer off the lane. It's all commercial products. If you put these things together and package in the right way, you have an autonomous car. So I think at some point we find out that we have these modes where the car drives for 30 seconds, 60 seconds autonomously, and then the lawyers have to just figure it out. So it'll be 200 years or so. Yeah, John.
How often, you said you got, as one of your slides, you got a 0.02% false positive rate, but how many decisions are there in 140 miles? It seems like it has to be amazingly stringent to have a...
Yeah, so if you get a false positive, it means one of your grid cells says I'm occupied, and it actually isn't, okay? Now if you're lucky and have a big bush next to you, and it's 2 grid cells wide, then our car just goes to the 1 grid cell. So we drive over lots of stuff that either appears to us as occupied or actually legitimately is. Like there's tumbleweeds. One of the big failure points is birds. We had a bird attack, so a bird attacked us in a race. We come down and fly through the laser, and it looked just like a big obstacle. And occasionally the car would swerve for that reason. We knew from the beginning this is not a perfect car for desert driving. There's situations under which it would still crash. But in our test drives, we found that this incredibly rare encounter of red dots on the vehicle's path, some of which were actually really things, like little plants and so on, wasn't a safety factor. Right.
So I imagine after all that testing, you probably were pretty secure that there'd be no big surprises. But did you have any machinery for dealing with unmodeled surprises?
You know, I wish to some extent we had a layer that would restart software components and restart hardware components as they failed. And at some point we tried to build a dual computing architecture that would duplicate itself, but then our computers never really crashed.
But I mean environmental or sensory.
Environmental, no, we didn't. We basically we had a couple of rules that were kind of dangerous, like we would keep driving all the time. In fact, we had one surprise. We had a timing problem with one of the USB hubs that would delay sensor data, and that would make more false obstacles. And it was actually observed that the car at least once swerved off the road into the berm and back, and it was reported by Nova. That happened 195 times in the race and never before. I wish we had the engineering resources to do a good job there. And I think it's true for every single team. The number of teams that failed because of some unexpected surprises like a memory leak was substantial. I think it's something that certainly needed some redundancy.
I'm surprised that the surprises that you cite, even by reflex, were all system surprises, not sensory.
Almost all. After we fixed the sensor problems, the kind of things that I kind of alluded to in my talk, all the software problems were all system type problems. Every single one was like a racing condition, it was a Linux condition. We had in one of our test runs, we had a software module crash 1,600 times, and it restarted itself 1,600 times, and finally Linux crashed. The car kept running just the way it was running before. There was some redundancy for failure of sensors and so on. We had multiple sensors, many more than we needed. But it's hard. It's also, we tried certain things. Like at some point we said, okay, we're going to back up when there's an obstacle. And we actually actuated the gear shifter, and we had a full mode where when the road was blocked, it would stop, back up, and go forward again. And then it turned out it did this every 5 minutes. It was really hard to make a decision when there's actually an exception. And then we just say, let's take our chances and just go, because we're going to lose too much time over it. Yes?
Before the race, how confident were you that you were going to finish?
100%. Actually, it was good. So in the weeks leading up to the race, we've basically frozen everything. And we gotten to the point where for weeks we drove without any change, no parameter change. In fact, before the race itself, we all went on vacation. We went on a team on vacation before the race. And in the NQE, we never changed anything. And the car ran completely predictable. So we knew that, in principle, the car was able to finish. And we had very high hopes. We knew the only thing that could derail is something completely unexpected, like a computer crashing that never crashed before, a flat tire or something like this. So we had a high confidence the car would actually make it through the race. When we saw the data of the race itself, the confidence grew. We made some comments to the media, like the type, we are confident a car will finish. And they kind of critiqued us for that because they felt it was much harder. We had very little confidence of winning because they figured if we finish, Carnegie Mellon is going to finish. They drive more aggressively. And there's 21 other teams that also drive really well. What are the odds of winning? In the end, we also had a good amount of good luck, I think, that we won. But I was fairly confident that someone would finish, because given the hundreds of miles we did in the desert, assuming others will do the same thing, in principle, the competency is there to finish.
You mentioned some budget constraints for the last race. Were you able to take the prize money and dump it into the next upcoming challenge?
Yeah, and it turns out also fundraising right now happens really easy for us.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a plan right now to find, again, 5 companies to support us, and it looks like even before we started advertising it, we already have 4 of those. We are putting all the money back to innovation, basically. We started a scholarship, and the rest goes into development right now, so that we can gear up and pursue our larger goal of changing.
So given the funding is there, what do you think the biggest challenge? Hardware, software, combination, models?
So for me, this is 90% software and 10% sensors. Sensors is a big thing too, because to go really fast, you have to see really far, and seeing far is hard, especially in bad weather. This is all good weather driving here. Bad weather driving is a different animal. I think there's a big societal challenge. This is an area of robotics. The United States has lost its leadership in robotics almost uniformly against Japan and so on, with 2 exceptions. One is space, that no one cares about, and one is the military, right? Where America is very, very good, of course. This is an opportunity to catch on something that has civilian utility and to take leadership. So a lot of what I do right now is actually try to bring the gospel to Washington and tell people, listen, this is an opportunity. You have a lot of motion, a lot of inertia here. So Carnegie Mellon lobbied, we lobbied, lots of people lobbied on our behalf. And to some extent, the new race is the follow-up that I believe is somewhat influenced by our lobbying. The thing is, if people with real money and real expertise walk in, they can turn this into an industry and really into working technology. We kind of can give the existence proof that it can be done, a couple of hackers at a university. But if Ford walked in, I guess Ford is battling GM. So Toyota walked in and various other big companies, there's a real hope here. There's a really complicated funding situation in the United States right now having to do with military funding, in that the military work is blocked by 3-4 major companies that eat up all the money. And it's not clear that these companies have a vested interest in this technology maturing as quickly as it could, right? Because it keeps them money flowing, right? If you solve the problem, money doesn't flow anymore. It goes to private industries, not defense contracts anymore. Yeah?
Given your concern about human lives, going to the next race sounds a little dangerous.
I haven't given you all the specifics about the next race. Someone joked we should just run it in Baghdad, which is a really bad joke. The way it's likely going to happen is the military has training camps, training fake cities for training soldiers. There's many of those. And for emulating traffic, there's basically 2 solutions to this. One is to have all the robots race at the same time, and one goes from A to B to C to D, and the other one goes from B, D, E, C, F. And putting people into vehicles, but then give them really big things, like tanks. Okay, so if our little Stanley runs into a tank, it's flat, and the person doesn't even notice. And it's going to be a combination of both. Most likely just all robots running at the same time. Which will be a great media spectacle, right? You see them hit each other up and so on.
Do you have an approximate cost of the hardware on the vehicle you raced last year?
Yeah, so I have pretty exact numbers. The vehicle itself is a Volkswagen Touareg. It happens to be a supreme off-road vehicle. It can go at 45 degrees inclines. So if your shopping mall has a 45-degree incline, you can navigate it. It's completely over-engineered. The sensor instrumentation runs in the order of 40K. We have way too many sensors on there, by the way. And the computing was about 30K, of which we used a third of the capacity. We only used essentially 2 laptops. So 2 laptops you can run the same software that we ran. We often ask, like, how about commercial deployment? And if you work out the numbers between an IMU that every vehicle will have very soon anyhow, already has, for other purposes, a GPS that's already commonplace in every car, okay, and soon we're going to have a Z1, Z2 antenna, whatever it is, a laptop which costs $300, right? Put this all together, package it the right way. Steer-by-wire is going to be standard in many, many commercial vehicles. If you buy a Passat right now, it's already electronically actuated steering and braking and throttle. Then you end up with a cost maybe in the area of $2,000, okay? So you're really competing to a high-end stereo, okay? And then the question becomes, would you rather have a good stereo or a self-driving car? And I know what my choice is going to be. Stereo, of course, I love music.
How many years do you think it will take to win the next Grand Challenge?
Okay, so last year I arrogantly come up and said someone's going to finish. And this year I'm not going to say that. It's possible that we're going to engineer for finishing, but it's not inconceivable that the first one will be a disaster again. And let it be known for the fact that both DARPA and the contestants will have to learn the rules of the game. It could be that DARPA engineers it in a way that's incredibly hard. They're talking about navigating parking lots without any map whatsoever, right? You can make it so that it's incredibly hard. Or it could be that they shoot low and we get really, really big contractors move in, like General Dynamics, and they just kill it with $10 million.
If instead of finishing the race within the shortest time, considered other factors like how close you got to vehicles, if you were avoiding them, or say, comfort on the road or whatever, how do you think the different competitors would have compared against each other?
The biggest, yeah.
You can always, avoid obstacles, but get really dangerously close.
Yeah, so the biggest limitation that everybody cited, and Carnegie Mellon and we agree, were the speed limitations, turns out, because they were imposed to protect the environment and to make it easy to follow your car, and they were often way too slow for the terrain. So had you made the vehicle go loose and select their own speed, it would have been a much, much more involved race. I'm not really answering your question, but that's the number one dimension in which we, the contestants, would have loved to see the race opened up. Now, it turns out if you look at factors of elegance of driving, Stanford would have probably scored better than anybody else. Might have a somewhat subjective position here, but we were the only ones who never hit an obstacle in the pre-runs. And even during the race, Carnegie Mellon came back with 2 big dents in their cars. Each car had a big dent. In fact, one of the dents was a hole where the Google sticker used to be on the car. Just disappeared. Enjoy this, of course. So, I mean, there's also problems that we had. We had a timing problem when the car swerved off the road exactly once and came back. And that would have, of course, endured lots of points. I'm glad that they didn't do this, because it would have opened the debate for endless discussions about, just like ice figure skating, where we can discuss endlessly what the real score should have been. So even though a single criterion like arrival time is unfair, it's vastly unfair. Why should one team get $2 million and the other one zero? It at least made a very nice, verifiable, kind of sporty thing. And also made it nice for the media to report. We have a very complicated formula. The New York Times is not going to report an article on that formula, right? But first come, there's something Americans understand. Be the fastest. Okay, that's.
Yeah, so for these military applications where you're driving in the desert and driving in Baghdad, it makes sense to put most the instrumentation on the car itself. But for increasing the throughput of freeways, don't you think it would make some sense to add a lot of the instrumentation to the road?
Yeah, so there's a project called the Berkeley Path Project, which has eaten up tens of millions of dollars on understanding how we can instrument roads to make that possible. And my uninformed reflection on this, to be honest, because I'm not a business person, is it doesn't strike me as economical, because you would have to modify large parts of the highway first before the first autonomous car can be sold. Okay, so there's an economics issue. And then to some extent you can argue we've already done this, because we have satellites in space called for GPS, so we already put up instrumentation that's really expensive and for a different purpose, so we're basically piggybacking. And I think that's the right approach to technology. If you can piggyback, then piggyback. Now, if you look at this further, I mean, when the first cars were invented, no one proposed to pave the nation with pavement and distribute fueling station around the country before the first car would run. So they were really built to endure horse trails. Right, so we're basically in the horse trail age here, where we have to build cars that do more than cars will do 50 years from now. I think once this technology will take off, people will realize there's instrumentation that makes it infinitely easier. And I give one example, traffic lights. So the classical way to do traffic light detection is you put a camera on there and you look for the red or green light, right? And if, I don't know, the person walking by the traffic light is wearing a big red head, right? You stop. Now, in the future, what's going to happen, and it's actually being built right now, is what's called environmental car communications. You set up equivalent of 8 to 11B, and it radios to the car, I'm a traffic light and I'm red, and this is my GPS coordinates. And many of these perception problems will engineer away that way, but I think it's going to be a progression. You have to have a couple of cars out before you can go back and worry about the expenses you put in the infrastructure to make them work better. Yeah?
You said it wasn't your center of interest. If the military takes us over and runs it in the field, and I'm Abu Musab Zarqawi trying to fight it, how should I make these things misbehave as badly as I can?
Put a tumbleweed on the road, raise many birds, and feed them regularly. We had this moment, we were driving, and at 04 course, there's a big field, and the farmer just seeded the field, so there were thousands of birds eating basically the seeds, okay? And Stanley would come up to them at slow speed, and they would all fly up. And the map was red, right? So it would veer into the fields, come out again, and in doing this, it would get really slow, and the birds would all sit down 10 meters away from there. There's many ways. Many ways. I want to quantify my comments on military. I think saving lives is important no matter where. So if the military saves lives, I think right now the current military situation, even if we save American lives, we save Iraqi lives. There's no question. It's just not my main driver. I think the thing we can harvest is so much bigger in the civilian world than in just the military world.
It's a good place to be.
Okay.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.